All right. Hi, folks. As you come on board, settle on in. Again, we are going to be recording this and sending it around. My name is Kristin Wheeler. I am the Chief Strategy Officer with Galvanize Action. We are so glad that you're joining us today to talk about an extremely important topic of CRT with a very critical voting bloc, moderate white women. So joining me today, supporting in the Q&A function, is our research scientist, Rachel Firestone. Much of the work we're going to be showcasing today can be credited to her incredible work, so thanks to her. Additionally, Jenna Royal, who's our Partnerships and Impact Manager, will be joining us today. You'll definitely want to make sure you get in touch with Jenna, who will share her email in the chat function. She is going to be your go-to person if you have follow-up questions, or if you get really excited about any of the creative assets and messages we share. You can contact her to actually get those downloadable versions that you can run them to your own audience, white label, or with the Galvanize Action logo on that. We'll talk more about that at the end as well. So again, welcome everyone to talking about how to move more moderate white women in supporting critical race theory. So for those of you who are a little bit newer to Galvanize Action, the work we do is really focused on deeply understanding, connecting, and moving more white women to be supporting progress. So as we know, white women are an incredibly important voting bloc. We're going to talk a little bit more about why and the math behind it right now. So for those of you who don't know, 40% of the vote share in this country is actually made up of white women, and that number is going to stay the same for the next couple of decades. So it's incredibly important that we do whatever we can to deeply understand as many of them as possible so we can start to align their vote and their values more. As we saw in 2016 and 2020, more white women actually supported Trump. And so what we're seeing from that is that they're not just standing for things like Trump, but what he actually stands for himself. This is incredibly important as we talk about critical race theory today, which is deeply rooted in racial resentment, as we know. And so much of what Trump stood for in 2016 and 2020 was actually telling us that he is misogynistic, he is anti-immigrant, and the like. And so it's important that we understand the vote-driving behaviors of white women so that we can put in the correct intervention, make sure that we're actually learning how to overcome those barriers together and get through to more of them. The good news is that we've done a lot of the research to lay the groundwork, so hopefully we can leapfrog together as a movement, and no one else has to start from scratch with this voting bloc. We are incredibly appreciative of the amount of work that you all are doing in the movement, and we really do feel like white women are just one piece of the puzzle, but it truly is going to take us talking repetition over and over again and persuading as many voting blocs as possible to be aligning their vote behavior with something that stands for progress. So again, we are one piece of the puzzle, and it's really going to take a both and strategy to move us all forward. In 2022, Galvanize Action is incredibly focused in the Midwest and Rust Belt states of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Ohio. In those 4 states alone, the vote share of white women is actually 45%. So it's even more incredibly important that we're able to understand this audience and move them towards progress. You'll get a deeper dive into those 4 states on our playbook, which Jenna has shared the link if you haven't already checked it out. We really encourage you to do so. We're going to be showing you the different tools and techniques and ads and videos and messages and insights that you can get in the playbook today. So hopefully it becomes a really useful tool that you can bookmark and look into pretty often. If you have any questions as we go, again, pop them into that Q&A option and our team will get through to you on that way. And then for any questions we still have at the end, we'll have some time to verbalize those as well. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. So for those newer to Galvanize Action, we have a 3-prong approach to deeply understanding white women. The first is data science, which I think is a pretty common way that we all are looking to understand our voting bloc. We really work closely with Grow Progress and other partners to make sure that we understand the data behind what is driving white women's voting behaviors, and then to use that to actually dive deeper into nuanced understanding of how we can implement those interventions to move them toward progress. We really think it's important to combine this with behavioral psychology and neuroscience. There's so much principles available that really work in persuasion and mobilization. The good news is that all the neuroscience and behavioral psychology principles we'll be talking about today that are also in our playbook can really be applied to any voter, anyone with a brain. We are all wired pretty similarly. So that's the good news, is that if you don't have a huge focus in your own geographic area on white women, we're hoping that all the insights we share today, you can apply to that voter audience you have. Again, Jenna's going to walk you through some of those universal lessons and where to find those in the playbook in just a minute. All right, so I'm going to turn things over to Jenna Royal, again, our partnerships and impact manager. And our team put this out just 2 weeks ago. So if you haven't already, I definitely ask that you click into this, bookmark it, save it. You're going to want to look at it often, I'm sure, and forward it on to any allies and partners. We made it publicly available because we believe that it's no good if we just sit on this research and insights ourselves. So we definitely encourage you to forward it to other allies in the movement that could benefit from the lessons and the creative that are put into this playbook. So I'm going to welcome Jenna on to walk you through a little bit about what's in the playbook.
Hey y'all, my name is Jenna Royal and I am the Partnerships and Impact Manager here at Galvanize Action. My pronouns are she, her, and I am really excited to walk y'all through our playbook. It is packed full of information that is going to help you move the white women in your state towards progress. So we're going to start out on our homepage. It's going to be your overview on how the playbook works, the information that's available through Galvanize Action, and kind of our high touch on or a 30,000 foot view on the creative that's available. So you can start out at the top. You'll learn a little bit about the number of white women overall that we've identified and the basics of how we go about targeting and messaging to these women. Some of the background information on how we put this creative together, why we put the creative together, and some of the results that we've seen from the creative being deployed into the field by our partners like you guys. If you have worked with Galvanize Action before, or if you know that white women, moderate white women are your jam, and that is exactly where you want to put your messaging, you can go to messages and ads first, and that's the tab up at the top left. Under messages and ads, you can go directly to the issues that are available through our creative, and those will come in the forms of memes, GIFs, and digital ads that can be deployed into the field. And I will tell you how you can access those in just a minute, but you can see everything from climate to reproductive freedom to CRT, which is what we're going to be talking about today, healthcare, economy, immigration, all of these major issues that tend to drag moderate white women away from progress. We have figured out and cracked the code on how to talk to them about these issues and help them vote their values. So we're going to be focusing specifically on CRT today, but we know there are so many grievance-based issues that the extremist wing of the right really has started to dig in with moderate white women on. We're going to be talking about CRT today, but this approach works on just about every one of the issues that we see affecting this group of voters. So once you get behind our little sign-in wall, you can take a deeper dive into that messaging, how to access it, what it looks like, and what's available. If you are just breaking into the moderate white women game and want to learn more about the numbers of moderate white women that we think are persuadable in your state or in districts that you work in, if you want to learn more about the segments that we target, if you want to learn more about specifically the behavioral psychology behind that, then you can go to voter understanding, where you can see the traits, values, and beliefs that each of these persuadable segments has. We've got this amazing scatter plot that our research specialist, Rachel Firestone, has put together, where you can compare the values, beliefs, and traits of each of these persuadable segments. You can see the importance of these beliefs in their voting behavior. It's a really neat way to look at that. Here you can find the different traits and kind of the 30,000 foot view of what each of these persuadable segments looks like. And the different values that we address in the creative that we've made available to y'all. And if you'll scroll down just a little bit more, Kristin, we'll take a look at the next section. There we go. And then we've got this amazing map where you can look at your state and the number of women that we think are persuadable in your state. You can look at them by our segments: traditionalists, conservatives. They're labeled disengaged skeptics here, but we also call them uncertain individualists, and our trusting liberals. And so you can take a look at exactly the number of women available to y'all in each of your states. If moderate white women are not necessarily your vibe, but you love our approach and you'd love to do values-based messaging with your target segments, of the voting population, then you can go to our Universal Lessons tab where you can apply our effective strategies to any of your work. Here it has a diagram of our basic approach to why this works and how this works. We have an amazing video by our founder and executive director, Jackie Payne, on the background of how constructing one of these ads is put together. And then below that, we have a fantastic worksheet that will walk you step by step on how to take a value or the values of your particular voting segment and put a message like this together. And then below that, we have a series of videos on the neuroscience and behavioral psychology done by our partners MindBridge that will take you behind the scenes of the behavioral psychology that goes into this type of values-based messaging. So that's what's available in the playbook. This again is just a kind of a short overview. There's so much information here that you can dig into. Once you find something that you're intrigued by or that you have more questions on, or if you think everything in here is amazing and you want the keys to the castle and you want to see all of it, you can email me at jenna.royal@galvanizeaction.org. We'll have a short conversation about what's available, how it can be used, and then we will turn over all of our creative assets to you to be deployed into the field and take a look at. So again, it's jenna.royal@galvanizeaction.org, and I'm going to throw that in the chat a few more times before we're done here today. But thank you again for attending. I'll circle back around at the end to remind you of some of this stuff, but we're so excited for you to take a look at the playbook and dig into it more and see what's available to you to really help these moderate white women across the country move towards progress. Kristin.
Great. Thanks so much, Jen. I really appreciate that. And thanks to our whole team for putting this incredible playbook together. So we're going to dig into a couple of the features and actually show you how to use some of them, starting with this really beautiful, somewhat overwhelming scatter plot. So as Kelly shared already in the chat with you, I'll really encourage you to take a look at this blog that our comms team put together, which really breaks down what these traits and values actually mean in real time, in real life. So we worked with Grow Progress to conduct a recent modeling survey in the last few months, where we really looked at a much more nuanced understanding of what was driving our women's vote behavior. And so we were able to figure out those traits, those principles, those values, attitudes, et cetera, by working with our neuroscientist team at MindBridge Center, so that we're not just looking at the surface of what's driving their vote, but we're understanding the much more nuanced approach underneath. The more we can understand about the barriers that our voters have to supporting progress, the easier it'll be for us to develop the correct message, get it to the right voter, use the right tactic and intervention to move more of them towards progress. So you can play around with this yourself. We're going to make sure that you send out the recording, and then of course the link will be put into the chat a few times as well. So just as Jenna showed you, if you go under our voter understanding page, this is actually set up to be interactive. So this looks a little overwhelming, so I'm going to break this down and show a couple of highlights of things that you'd really want to focus on to better understand how to move our middle folks on critical race theory in particular. And much of this, as Jenna said, can be applied towards all culture wars. As we know, critical race theory is really just the tip of the spear when it comes to culture wars. We've been actually working since spring of last year to better understand our women and critical race theory. We started by doing a pilot with some partners in rural Wisconsin, actually calling moderate white women and finding out what barriers and opportunities we would have to move them on this subject. So one of the first things we did in this survey was understand who's entrenched on either side of the aisle. The folks that we need to know exist and we want to put everything into context with, but we know we're not going to be focusing on energy on moving them. So the first of those is our Trump conservatives. As you can see, they're this brightest red-orange color. And so they are much higher in conservative political narratives, racial resentment, and internalized sexism. For those reasons, and the fact that the majority of them supported Trump in 2020, we're removing them and not considering them movable at this time. Additionally, on the far other side of the spectrum, we have what we would consider our base. So for those of you who are really working to hold the base and find new ways to approach them, we encourage you to dig into understanding our liberal progressives. They're this bright blue color. Again, the traits that make them who they are very low in authoritarianism, yay, very low in out-group derogation, extremely low in racial resentment, as well as social significance. So again, if you want to dig into finding out more about who your base is looking like, please go ahead and interact with that piece in here. But for our sake today, we're going to be removing that segment from here. we're going to be focusing on the three most movable white women segments: our traditionalist conservatives, our uncertain individualists, and our trusty liberals. And so each one of these dots represents where they land according to one another on some of the biggest vote driver traits. To make this a little bit more simple, we're going to remove and just look at their prominent traits. So the biggest bubbles represent the things that are actually the most true about them. Doesn't necessarily mean that's the thing that they're the highest in. It means that that's the essence of who they are. So as soon as you remove one of those bubbles, you're actually breaking apart that model of voters. So if we focus in on our traditionalist conservative first, it's this dark pink color. This group, the most things that are true about them is they are above average on outgroup derogation, racial resentment. Again, this is a critical one to look at as we're talking about critical race theory. We know that the reason behind folks who are not yet supporting public school systems talking more about race and discrimination, even though we all know critical race theory is not actually being taught in our K-12 public education system, it's best not to actually fact battle with our voters, and we'll get into that in just a bit. So understanding where your vote audience actually stands on racial resentment is key. That's going to unlock a lot of the opportunities and have a better understanding of the barriers that your voting bloc may actually have when it comes to talking about race and discrimination in a school and education setting. Just for some context, the traditionalist conservatives sit at about 80 percentage points here, whereas the average white woman across the country racial resentment score is a 55. So you can see just how high above average they actually are and what barrier that is for them. Additionally, the other things that are important to point out here is that they're extremely over-indexed in benevolent sexism. Sexism for white women across the country is about 50, so right there in the middle. This is one of the biggest drivers that this group actually had that really turned them to support Trump even more in 2020. And when we say benevolent sexism, we separate it from internalized sexism. Benevolent sexism is really about the belief that women should be put on a pedestal and should be cherished. And so while it often comes off to many of us on the progressive side as a huge barrier, seeing it as what the strength side could be for women and understanding your messengers when talking to this audience because of their benevolent sexism is extremely key. So just to give you a better understanding of who traditionalist conservatives are, I'm going to pop over to their demographics. We often look at demographics last. It's the smallest part of the iceberg on the top of the surface that we can all see. It's important to know so that we can actually locate them. However, it doesn't tell us everything we need to know about them. So we often focus on psychographics and values first. But just so you can hold who this person is your head, as you can see, the median age is 58. They live in much more rural and very rural settings. Their education is a high school graduate level. They have lower household incomes, and most of them are currently unmarried, but that's their current status. So better understanding if they're divorced or widowed is really critical to make sure that we are actually messaging to them in the right way and understanding if they have children present at home, which most of these women do. So when it comes to traditionalist conservatives, we think the biggest opportunity, especially around critical race theory, is persuasion. We know that there is a group of them that we can actually still persuade to better support this. And persuading them to do that will actually hold them back from being pulled, as Jenna said, with those grievance-based narratives to the right. So we'll get into that approach in just a minute. But I wanted to focus in a little bit on our middle group, our uncertain individualists. So these folks, this yellow dot here, the things that are most true about them is that they're actually below average compared to white women across the country in compassion, which is really interesting, as well as being lower in moral righteousness, extremely low in political self-efficacy, which tells us that they're much more disengaged. They're tuning out on the civic and political process right now. And so they might not just need their agency lifted, they might actually need some more information for them to form an opinion on a subject like critical race theory. Additionally, they are slightly above average in internalized sexism, and they're lower in their self-esteem. So let's take a look at who these folks are and their demographics. So their median age is 29. The majority of them are actually all under the age of 35. So they're definitely a specific generation that you could probably think of in your head. They predominantly live in rural and very rural areas. Their income is a little bit higher than our traditionalist conservatives and trusting liberals, but still majority under 75K in their full household. As you can see, the majority of them actually have a high school degree or less. So when you think about this group, you look at their age, you'd think, oh, student loans, college, those things are going to be on their mind. but that's not actually front and center for this specific group of voters. And then last but not least, they are majority unmarried and don't have children present in their home. And I think it's helpful to hold their vote share in 2020 because it really paints a picture of how disengaged and possibly across the board they might actually be. A third actually sat out and did not vote in 2020. A third supported Trump and a third supported Biden. So we believe that there's a huge opportunity, especially when it comes to culture wars, to move more of them to actually align their vote with the values that we know to be true to them. So we believe that they're pretty open on climate, critical race theory, reproductive freedom. They're very supportive of marriage equality. And so the key for them, I think, is going to be moving the ones we can closer to progress and then making sure the other ones don't actually get swayed to the right from mis and disinformation, which we know is a huge piece hitting our women right now. So lastly, our trusting liberals, they're not quite base. So it's this teal color, as you can see. And we think that they're not quite base because 15% of them still actually ended up voting for Trump in 2020. Another 15% actually sat out and didn't vote in 2020. The things that are most true about them, as you can see, there are our most trusting group here, which means that they do have a lot of trust in government entities and one another and their community overall, which is a great spot to play into if you have trusting liberals in your geographic area. Additionally, they believe that there's an important role for government to play. So again, really playing out the fact that our government should be implementing social safety nets and helping to take care of us so that we all thrive is a really good bright spot to play into with this group. The things to look out for with this group is that they're certainly lower in outgroup derogation. However, if we look at their demographics, they're older. So they're a majority over the age of 65. And so they're definitely of a different generation, especially when we're talking about critical race theory and culture wars. And so some of these new concepts that are coming out in our education systems, the fact that the current generation today is the queerest it's ever been, I think they want to be good and right. However, some of these concepts are much newer to them because of generational. And so deeply understanding their values is going to be critical to reaching them on culture wars and really making sure that the right doesn't get a hold of them and pull them further to the right. So this group is at risk of backsliding, but if we can get to them and hold them where they are, we believe that they can look more and more like our liberal progressive base, and we can reliably count on them for voting for progress so that we can all thrive together. Definitely encourage you all to dig into each one of these pages so that you can better understand these voter blocks. We have one for each. Additionally, in here, you'll get a better sense of what creative assets and messages across issues work for them. There's a little quiz to test your knowledge. And then we also call out their exact values so that nobody has to guess. You can just come in here, take a look, and understand exactly what these values look like for them. So that's a look at across the board, our middle segments that we're really going to be focused on today. So let's dive a little bit deeper into critical race theory and where these segments actually fall. So probably not surprising, critical race theory has become such a hot topic. Again, it stood for so many different things. We all know that critical race theory is not actually being taught in our K-12 public education system. However, it's vitally important that we pause and understand the fears and anxieties that a lot of our middle white women segment actually feel around this topic. So we conducted a recent tracking survey just a couple of weeks ago. These results are from with white women in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin to get a sense of where they fall on this topic right now. What we've seen over the last 6 months is they haven't made major shifts on critical race theory. However, the closer we get to November, we know that the more and more the right are going to be using fear and anger tactics, just as Governor Youngkin did in 2021 in the Virginia governor's race, to really pull people to supporting the right. And so what we can see here is on the left, we're showing the percentage of white women who think their public school system is focusing too much on teaching about racism and discrimination. So this is really showing us the folks that there might be a small persuasion window with some of them, but we have to keep an eye on it to make sure that these bar graphs aren't getting any bigger. So again, on the left here, we're seeing our Trump conservatives. They're the highest, not surprising. And then on the furthest to the right here, we see our liberal progressives. They are obviously the lowest on this part, but the interesting piece is where our middle segments fall. So as we can see, interestingly enough, our trusting liberals are much higher than even our traditionalist conservatives in believing that the school system is focusing too much on teaching about racism and discrimination. And across the board, our trusting liberals believe a third think it's too much, a third think it's too little, a third think it's just about right. So it's a really critical voting block that we pay attention to so that that doesn't get mixed up, and we can hold as many as possible to either support just about right or too little. We believe that the reason that this group, like I said earlier, is falling into this third split is because of that generational piece. And the fact that one of the biggest pieces that's highest for them is security. So this is a group that definitely does not like instability or chaos, and they really like things to be controlled. They want to understand exactly what is going on. And if we look at our uncertain individualists, so again, these is our younger demographic of white women, so of a very different generation here we're talking. And not surprisingly, they're a little bit lower than our other middle segments on focusing too much on racism and discrimination. And then you can see the folks who think it's too little is actually highest out of our middle segment, telling us that they definitely are open and not quite entrenched on either side. And we think because generationally speaking, they're much closer to being in school, they've really seen social movements already come about, they're in a different part of our racial justice system right now. We believe that we have a huge opportunity, especially as more and more of them are becoming moms and caregivers themselves. The more of them we can actually get to support this being taught in our school system, the less likely it is that they'll actually be pulled to the right. And then last but not least, our traditionalist conservatives. So again, interesting, they're pretty split with trusting liberals on teaching too little about it. However, a good chunk of them still think we're focusing too much, telling us that there is a huge persuasion opportunity with this segment. So we can forward all this information to you all, which is really interesting. All right, so I think there's a question in the chat here, Julie. We use CRT just to tell you what it is. As you'll see in our messages, Julie, we would never say the words critical race theory to our women. As you can see, this question here was actually just teaching about racism and discrimination. For shorthand today, we really want to make sure that folks are understanding that we are really trying to get in there and make sure the right is not using CRT as the topic that's pulling more of our women to the right. So let's get into those lessons learned right now and messages and ads. So we've spent the last couple of years, as I said, deeply understanding these middle segments of white women, and specifically around culture wars and critical race theory. What we've learned is that one of the most important lessons is to actually learn how to sidestep their internalized racial resentment. If you want to go back to that scatter plot, it's available in the playbook to play around and learn how each one of these segments already falls on racial resentment. But for our middle segments in particular, they're a majority of them actually what we would refer to as colorblind. So their racial resentment shows up as just worldview, which means that they believe the system is fair and right, and if you just follow the rules, that things will work out okay. And so if you don't follow those rules, it's on you. And so if you think about our generations, especially of our traditionalist conservatives and trusting liberals, they went to school and grew up in a time where the good and right thing to do was to not see color. Obviously, we've really evolved, especially as a progressive movement, and we believe that that is not the most progressive stance to hold right now. However, you really need to understand how to translate that out of progressive liberal speak and meet the voters where they are. If they are colorblind, if they have fear and anxiety around this, it's critical that we actually mention those fear and anxieties back to them, mirror it back so they feel heard and understood, and then move them into a world in which they are still good and right, and the progressive values are really showcased here. So especially because we're talking about white women, as you'll see in that scatter plot, we did a whole model around social significance, which is really the fear of losing power. So a lot of this is actually turning into much more extremism, but how it shows up with our middle white segments is fear and anxiety around how your child might be told, especially if you have a white son in your household, he might be told he's racist at school. That's a huge fear and anxiety for our caregiver mothers in the middle there. You don't want your kid to ever be told he's wrong. You don't want him to be set up. So that in-group care value is incredibly important to understand and message to and around with this middle segment of folks. So while we know that that might not actually be happening, it might not be true, if it's a fear and anxiety they hold, we have to meet them there and then move forward together. You'll see a lot of our messaging is all around making sure that we recognize that Our voters' children themselves are set up for success. It's actually better off. We've learned more as a society, and it's okay that things are different right now, and they'll still thrive in the future, and they'll actually be better off. So a lot of the memes that you'll see in our playbook are all based around that, and getting around that anxiety and fear our women with sons in their household have. Additionally, using imagery that really taps into their values of caring for one another, equality, and patriotism has really been strong. So anytime you can center America as the hero, the better off you'll be with our women who are extremely high in patriotism. And we'll show you an ad that does just that. And then last but least, across all issues, we do this, but it's incredibly true when it comes to teaching about race and discrimination in the public school system. So speaking to their values rather than changing who they are is critical. They don't have to be the biggest racial justice supporters of all time. They don't have to join the Black Lives Matter movement to align their viewpoint with something that supports progress for all. We need to move them far enough forward so that their values are aligning with progress and they see how them and their families can actually thrive in that world. We don't need all of them to join the liberal progressive segment. So I think it's important that we understand what's possible, what's effective, and really focus on making the biggest moves we can with the best possible voting segments. Okay, so we're going to move forward here and actually show you some of these messages and ads. So as Jenna pointed out, one of these ads, World War II veteran, we actually have a behind the scenes video on why this was filmed, the why behind it with our founder who is featured in this video, Jackie Payne. I definitely encourage you all to take a look at that. It's found under the Universal Lessons page as a reminder. But we're gonna go ahead and watch this video together. I'm just gonna make sure screen share is on. One moment, please, with the sound. Sorry, folks. Okay. So we're gonna watch the video and then we're gonna break it down and I'll point out a few pieces of why we did certain things in here.
When my grandfather's B-17 bomber was shot up in World War II, he and his crew were saved by the Tuskegee Airmen, an all-black segregated unit. Pop always said those guys never got the respect they deserved, and he urged us kids to always stand up against discrimination. We need to learn from our past so we can continue to make our country great. That's why I support teachers being able to talk with our kids about race and discrimination in a fair and honest way. I know my pop would want that.
So one of the most effective pieces about this ad is actually, it's a true, complete true story. It's very authentic. This actually did happen to Jackie's grandfather. And what you'll see throughout here is using the callback images, the black and white images, the music, etc., really evokes that patriotism, that nostalgia. So looking back on times. And then the biggest thing overall is the in-group care. So right away, Jackie is talking about her grandfather. Jackie, a white woman herself, is very salient with our voters. They can see themselves. They have grandparents themselves. They think lovingly of them. The other in-group care cues that we put in here is Jackie never actually pauses and introduces her kids in here, but she shows them. So she's sitting down with her two children, showing the different memorabilia from her grandfather that he had in World War II and using it that way. And again, Julie, to your question in the chat, she never says critical race theory. She never even approaches that subject. She's really approaching it as something that her grandfather experienced. She learned that lesson from him. He would be proud. He, as a trusted member of the military, a trusted messenger through Jackie, is really making it okay for women to think again, okay, well, that was World War II. Things are different. If this is what he would think, if this is what our kids need now, there's a chance there. This is one of our most effective messages and ads overall with white women. This ad alone has moved conservative and Republican women 26 percentage points in our lab test. We're currently running a randomized controlled trial with it right now to match that up with field results. So we're happy to share that back with folks when we get those results back. But the important thing to know too is that this didn't have any backlash effects with the liberal progressives or the trusting liberals. It actually helped move uncertain individualists and trusting liberals just as much as it moved traditionalist conservatives. So it's something that's able to really cut across that middle segment of white voters. But if you're targeting it to folks and you pick up some liberal progressives, you're not going to have any backfire effects. So this is an example of an ad that you can watch again on our playbook. We also have an Ohio specific version of this where it ties into a story about the last Tuskegee Airman before he just passed last year, who was an Ohio native. If you're interested in this ad or the other ones we're going to show you, again, you can reach out to Jenna and she can get you that downloadable version, either as white label or with the Galvanize Action logo. All right, I'm going to show you another ad here. Move on to the next one. Okay, so this one was filmed with the messenger Kelly. Again, an authentic story in Ohio. We'll break it down after we watch it.
It's hard to know the right thing to say anymore. I teach my kids that everyone is equal and deserves respect no matter their race. I want them to succeed in life and be better equipped to have the conversations about race and discrimination than I was. I hope they can have those conversations in schools with teachers who know them before they head out into the real world. That's why I support school programs that deal with race in an honest and unbiased way.
Okay, so breaking this one down a little bit, right out of the gate, you see Kelly, she's sitting at her table, you see there's schoolwork, there's bills, she's in her real life kitchen, there's a little bit of a mess there, I'm sure we all have that in our kitchens right now. And so what we're trying to do is really connect with the voter immediately, build that saliency so they can feel like they're sitting at the kitchen table with Kelly having this conversation. And right out of her mouth, she's already talking about the complicated feelings that a lot of our women hold. From our audience understanding surveys and our open-ended responses, we were able to dive deeper into knowing that sometimes they just don't know the right thing to say. Things are rapidly shifting, especially for our older generation demographics of our trusting liberals and traditionalist conservatives. So Kelly mirrors that back to them right away in this ad and actually tells them, like, we don't always know the right thing to say. Things are complicated. It's a little bit confusing. We're not in school ourselves. But then she immediately goes into saying, like, we all want to be good moms, though. And she has a lot of compassion for her children. Again, she never really has to introduce her kids or her family. But what you see through the ad is her playing with her children, which a lot of our voters can connect with. She even has her parents there. So you're bringing in that intergenerational piece as well to really talk about how we can all do better in a world where our kids have the opportunity to talk openly in an unbiased way about racism and discrimination in the school system. So this ad and a couple of others are actually broken down, and as well as the messages on the Universal Lessons page. If you want a pop-up video style VH1, we have a great CRT ad on there under Universal Lessons, which slows down and shows you the different pieces of neuroscience principles that are popping up that we use. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about some other messages and break down what we found to work overall when talking about race and discrimination with our audience. And then I'm also going to show you a blooper reel message that did not work at all. So hopefully you can learn from our lessons and really hold on to what has been effective. Okay, so I'm going to read this message out loud and then we'll break it down to talk a little bit about why we think that this worked so well. I enlisted when I was 18 and served for over 30 years. I love this country, warts and all. I tell my kids it's not your mistakes that define you, it's how you handle them. The guys I served with were men of honor. They owned their mistakes and earned my respect. That's why I support teaching kids our full history in school, including racism and discrimination. I love this country and know it's great, and I'm strong enough to admit the mistakes. I want our kids to learn from them so they can be the best they can be. So this message actually moved Trump supporters in 2020 21 percentage points. It moved Republicans 19 percentage points, conservatives 19 percentage points, and suburban white women 13 percentage points. So again, there was no backlash effects with liberals and progressives, but it was definitely aimed at those traditionalist conservatives. And we think that the reason that this worked so well is that immediately out of the gate, we established a trusted messenger. And for our women in particular, especially on the more center-right side, a trusted messenger, especially around these complex culture war topics, is often military or those who have served in the military. So right out of the gate, we establish that this trusted messenger comes from the military, step one. You're also getting that slight bit of patriotism and nostalgia there. You're making sure that patriotism is front and center right away. So I love this country. So you're establishing the trusted messenger, he loves this country. And then after you already trust him, within the second sentence, you're already talking about the guys that he served with were men of honor. So again, you're making that in-group more clear. Our women are connecting with that overall. And then because they're already trusted, you can believe him when he says, I love this country, no, it's great, and I'm strong enough to admit the mistakes. So having that trusted messenger say those things that are barriers, fears, anxieties is really, really imperative, especially when we're talking about these complex culture war issues. And so that's a really easy way to break down this type of message. Again, you usually only have 80 to 90 words as we know to get something across. So a strong formula that we've created is understanding what's the barrier that you need to move your voters over? What's the thing you want them to actually support in the end? Understanding that barrier and getting it out of the way really quickly within those first 80 to 90 words. And then making sure that their values are front and center. And then making sure that in a more hopeful way, they see what the world should look like and what they can support. So here ending, I want our kids to learn from them so they can be the best they can be. That immediately speaks to in-group care. So it's really helping to sidestep any fear, anxiety that women might have. So you can download a whole PDF of this message and all the other statistically significant messages that we found that move our women on culture wars. So we've got some book banning messages, memes, and GIFs. We've got some stuff on LGBTQ rights, and we also have a lot more on critical race theory. So we encourage you to check out the full culture wars page on the Playbook. So I want to move us into a lessons learned message here. So I'm going to read this one out and then break down why we think it did not work. Instead of doing their job to support our kids, certain politicians are turning schools into battlegrounds for their own political gain. They're using race as a fear tactic to turn us against each other and undermine our trust in our children's teachers. I trust our schools and support curriculums that discuss race and discrimination in an age-appropriate, honest, unbiased way. So we think that this did not work to move our folks because we repeated back messaging from the right. So saying the words fear tactic, turn us against each other, is actually words that the right, as we know, are using on critical race theory. So it's a little bit confusing. It doesn't instill any hope, doesn't really make you feeling left, like you feel better about things if you were to support this topic, which we do not want to do, obviously. And then lastly, it didn't really provide much of a story or of an experience or of a why. So there's not a trusted messenger that you can really pick up and quickly identify here. So you're just kind of blanket statement supposed to take this person's word as it is. So if they say, I trust our schools, we didn't establish the trusted messenger enough. So you don't really know why they trust our schools and therefore why you should trust them. So again, it's kind of showing you the reverse of the previous message. So we often, we don't get it right straight out of the book. We really just try a lot of different things. And we really want to make sure that our lessons learned are going back to you all so that you can pick up where we left off and continue to find effective ways to meet your audience on this subject. As we know, the fear tactic, the anger that is coming through from the right, especially across culture wars, is becoming extremely effective. It's becoming one of the biggest leading disinformation narratives, especially when it comes to reaching middle, moderate, white women. And so we keep a close eye on this. And as you'll see in all of our approaches and our effective messages, especially across culture wars, we don't go down that same path. We don't use fear and anger messaging. We learned early on that with our women in particular, with moderate white women, it just doesn't work. And it might work once, and you might hold them on the left towards progress for a little bit after that, but you're going to lose them in the long run. And so it's critical that we establish a narrative that is built around hope, where they are the heroes, where they have more agency in it, and that we're actually priming them over and over again. And so we believe that repetition for persuasion to work is critical. We can't just swoop in 6 weeks before an election and expect that we can be the heroes and their trusted messengers. We have to figure out ways to continue to stay in communication and community with this audience year out, so that when the right does attempt to use their fear and anger tactics, they don't backslide to the right. As we know, and as we saw in 16 and 20, those fear and anger tactics worked because they offered up a strong man. Time and time again, history tells us that when things are chaotic, when fear and anger is on the line, they will run to a strong man, which is often the right. And so we don't want them to run there. We want them to feel at home. We want to give them a choice and make sure that they know that they are good and right and that their values are at home with a more progressive space. And to make sure that they are aligning those values, which we think point towards progress, with an actual vote toward progress. So I'm going to pause there and ask Jenna to just come on and talk a little bit more and remind folks how they can get access to all of this great information. And then I'm happy to speak to any questions that pop up. So I'll speak to questions in the chat, but if you have more that you want to pop in, now is a great time to do that. And then I'll verbalize those in just a minute. Over to you, Jenna.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm really excited to hear and answer questions. But do not forget that you can find this playbook at playbook.galvanizeaction.org. If you are like some of us on the team and you can't ever remember personalized links, you can also go to galvanizeaction.org and find it right there featured on the homepage. So you can just go where you've always been, and we've got some nice happy buttons there for you to push to get to it. If you have any questions about the playbook, about our creative, or would like access to that creative and would like more information on how you're allowed to use it, please email me at jenna.royal@galvanizeaction.com. If you have questions about the research or the approach, I may not be the expert, but I will absolutely locate the expert and we will get you connected with all the information that you need. We will, at the end of the summer or nearing the end of the summer, we're going to be hosting a partner roundtable so that we can all get together. We'll give you updates on the playbook, updates about things that are going to be added throughout the summer and early fall. Give us a chance to listen to what y'all are seeing in the field on how it could best be deployed. Give us a chance to talk about ways that we're using it. And just really kind of be a creative think tank on how we can best use the amazing information in this playbook. We're also going to be sending out periodic research newsletters so that you can have the most up-to-date information on these RCTs and the tracking surveys that we're doing on all of these ads. So keep an eye out for those as well. You'll need to opt into those. So we will be sending the next one out very soon. And from that one, you can opt into all of the remaining ones. So keep an eye out for those. But Kristin, I'll pass it back to you for questions and answers.
Great, thanks, Jenna. So we've got a couple of questions that came in that look like they should be verbalized here. So one question about if we have a program and insights around LGBTQ+ issues. It's a great question. Our team is digging into that right now. As Jenna mentioned, we're doing a bi-weekly tracking survey. We just got insights back around additional culture wars and how women fall on that. So we're happy to provide that. We'll be pushing out all of the tracking survey insights to everyone who joined here today. So stay tuned for that. We specifically were digging into trans student athletes. We were digging into sex and sexuality teaching, digging into renaming of schools that had historical figures rooted in racism and segregation and the like. And so what we're learning is that this approach really can be applied to a multitude of issues. So we encourage you to check out the Culture Wars page to dig deeper into those. And what you'll see there is our early research on book banning, ads and memes associated with that topic. We've got an ad that really talks about how to reframe and pull folks away from trans rights and culture war issues and really try to get our leaders to focus on the things we really do care about, that we don't have problems with, like the economy. It's time maybe they focused on fixing that for all of us. So stay tuned for more on that topic, but it's really good to know that folks are interested in that in particular. There's a question about whether our ads are branded ads and unbranded. You can access both. So if you contact Jenna, we are very happy to provide all of our ads as white label, which means that you can put your logo onto it. You can work with us if you need to tweak the call to action at the end. Otherwise, you are also welcome to take it pre-approved from us with the Galvanize Action logo. Sometimes it's helpful for an audience to hear from a totally different group so that they're getting a very similar message from multiple spaces. So we're welcome to work with you to figure out which type that you would want. All of our memes or GIFs are available full white label. There's no logos on those as well. And then there's a great question here for ads for rural radio. I think radio is a really interesting thing to pay attention to, especially as the digital space gets way more expensive and way more challenging with targeting. In 2020, our founder, Jackie Payne, her separate legal entity PAC, the One for All Committee, did run some of our ads on radio, especially with rural voters, white women rural voters in Maine. And we saw that it was a pretty low energy resource lift to take our ads and just use the correct, radio version of it. And we had a lot of success there. We're not currently running anything on radio, but it's definitely something we're paying attention to. Currently, the ads you saw here today, as well as ads on reproductive freedom, prescription drug costs, paid family leave, and the like, are running to voters in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Ohio over streaming, over the top, and social, such as Instagram, Snapchat, and Facebook. We have vertical versions and short versions of most of our ads too. So for folks who are looking for a variety of streaming platforms and social platforms to meet their voters on, we're hoping that those versions will work really well for you as well. I see another question here. Let's see, what's the next one that came in? Consulting and creative messaging. We are always happy to be a resource to you. We are truly hoping that this playbook can be a one-stop shop. We are a pretty small but mighty team. And what we're hoping is that the playbook can be a great first place for folks to dig in, understand our lessons. If you are looking for kind of that like messaging, consulting, etc., we definitely encourage you to check out the Start Your Own Messaging worksheet that Jenna pointed out. It's a really great place. And what we did was we took all the prompts we ask ourselves internally, all the internal brainstorm dialogue our small research team has, and put them into a worksheet for you all. And so any feedback you have as you use that tool or as you use other tools in the playbook, we really want to hear from you. How is it working for you? What else would be helpful? Additionally, as soon as you provide your email and name on that firewall that pops up on the Universal Lessons page, you will get access to what I have to say is probably the greatest resource ever. You get to learn directly from Laura Liguori of the MindBridge Center, who's an incredible neuroscientist. So you get all the short videos that is going to teach you exactly how to apply neuroscience principles to reaching your audience, whether they're white women or a totally different voter bloc. Okay, I'm looking in the chat for other questions. Yes, we have branded and unbranded that we would have access to. Again, get in touch with Jenna for those. And then we've got Teresa letting us know she's a retired elementary school teacher. So interesting, running for school board. How do I capitalize on that without making myself look like a liberal indoctrinator? Great question. I think the key is all in the translation. So understanding where you want to move your supporters and voters on what topic. And then thinking through what values they're holding. Again, what fear and anxieties and barriers might be true for them, and translating your message so you're meeting them at those fears and anxieties. You're not repeating back language that feels really jargony. So again, not repeating back critical race theory in any of your messages or ads to them, and really starting in a place, especially when we're talking about school board, which is becoming a much more contentious place. So I applaud you all who are venturing into that space to really think about how you want your voters to feel. You want them to feel like they are in charge, they have control, they have a say, and that their kids are going to be supported and told they are good and right as well. The more you can repeat back to caregivers that they are good and right, and that you want to really capitalize on the strengths and the bright spots that they have, the better off that you will be in actually getting them to support your issue, especially when it comes to race and discrimination. But it can definitely be applied to talking about sex and sexuality in schools, making sure that folks are supporting library systems and teachers to make good and right choices for our children in terms of what books are available. Again, a lot of it is just putting yourself in the shoes of our voters and taking our research and insights. We have to really understand that we have to break out of our progressive bubble to meet folks where they are. And we're just in different places, except we all want to head towards the same finish line. So keeping that in mind and reducing as much judgment as possible is really key to make sure that we can sustain these conversations with voters who aren't already with us on some of these issues. Okay, I'm just going to see if there's any final questions from any folks that folks want to put into the chat or the Q&A. And then, of course, you can always contact Jenna for any further questions that might come to you. We'll also be sending out the full recording today. We encourage you to forward it along to any allies or partners, as well as the playbook link, which we will resend in the email. All right, it looks like we've answered most of our questions here. So I just want to thank folks again for all your work that you've done in the movement. We're so appreciative of your support, and we're really excited to get any feedback you might have on our playbook. We'll have iterations to come as well. As a preview, if you signed up to join us today, you will get notified of new creative. We'll have some new reproductive freedom and economy messages that will be loaded into the playbook in just about a month. And then our founders pack, the One for All committee, if you're interested in seeing what they're doing in key Senate races, those will be available to partners in the playbook as well later in August. So stay tuned for those updates. If you've got additional questions, please reach out to Jenna. And we're so grateful for all of your collaboration and support as partners. Thanks, folks. Have a great rest of your day.